Welcome, everyone, to ESG Decoded. I am Yvonne Harris, and I'm really looking forward to my conversation today with Rachel Schneider. For context, our discussion will focus on the S in ESG. The S stands for, in part, the people elements impacting businesses and organizations. So this includes employee relations, organizational health, culture, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, community outreach, and health and wellness. This is not a comprehensive list. And actually going back, the S itself, the word in the acronym is social. So from my perspective, Rachel has expertise in the space for the intersectionality of people culture, employee relations, health and wellness, and well-being. But I will bring her in the conversation and see what she thinks of my assessment. Rachel is the founder and CEO of Canary, a company helping the 21st century social net evolve to reflect the future of work. She's led development of the Grant Circle, a high-impact solution for challenges she uncovered as co-author of the Financial Diaries. Grant Circle exists so employees can access emergency support in times of financial need and enable them to recover quickly. She brings experience from Merrill Lynch, Financial Health Network, and the Aspen Institute as their entrepreneur in residence. Rachel credits her commitment to the potential for innovative finance to solve major social problems from her days as a VISTA volunteer. So Rachel, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for supporting the ESG Decoded podcast.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
So, Rachel, you heard my working definition, or at least just some context to get us started about the meaning or the definition of the S in ESG. But from your perspective, what does the S mean?
Yeah, so I think you and I are really aligned there. The S is really social. We mean it really broadly to be about people. And so that means the people of the company as well as the other stakeholders who care about the company's activities. So that could mean a local community, and it could mean customers. And what's really interesting, I think, is that we're just at the early stage of defining that S in a way that companies can make it actionable. So, I mean, what does it mean to care about your people? That's a really broad and big question.
It is very broad. And not only is it broad, I think at some times or at some points it's hard to measure. And
Yeah.
we know in businesses and organizations, what gets measured gets done. So I'm putting that saying aside, though. Rachel, guide us. What do we need to do to make sure that the S gets stronger and that there are goals and benchmarks to ensure that it's being executed against by companies more easily and more effectively?
I think there's been a lot of awareness over the last several years that of the three pillars of ESG, S is the least well-defined and the least measurable as a result, right? So for E, the environmental piece, it was fairly straightforward to start talking about carbon emissions and start to measure them. And so as a result, that makes it easier for companies to make a goal of being net carbon zero, right? Net zero in their emissions. And so on the governance side, similarly, it's actually pretty straightforward to start measuring how many independent board members are there, what is the diversity of the board, and then you can have shareholder action around that, right? And so those two elements were much easier to measure, and therefore we've made quicker progress on them. Not that there's not a lot to do, but they went first, if you will. The S, we're starting to see real innovation around, which is so exciting. So some of the work I'm really excited about is done by Just Capital. And what they've done is they have gone out and surveyed Americans. So they've done a nationally representative survey over the course of several years, surveying hundreds of thousands of people. And they basically said to them, how do you define whether or not a company is just? And coming out of that survey work, they've been able to define the S, right? So what people say overwhelmingly across demographic groups, across economic groups, across political groups, across really, geographic groups, what people say overwhelmingly is that the number one thing that defines whether or not a company is a just company which is I think what we're trying to get to with ESG in a philosophical way, is how the company treats its workers. And so from that, what Just Capital has done is they've engaged with research firms and other nonprofits like the Financial Health Network, where I used to work, at the Good Jobs Institute out of MIT, to define a living wage, to define what it means to provide wages, to provide benefits and other infrastructure that allow somebody to live a meaningful and purposeful and also sort of sustainable and enjoyable, rewarding life. And I've really gone and measured, come up with some quantitative measurements that you can deck against this idea of being good to your workers. And then they've been able to use those quantitative measurements to rank America's largest companies. And that's really the work, like, that additional step of defining and measuring that's so crucial. And it's been really exciting to see it grow over the last several years.
I want to spend a moment here, Rachel, because as you know, we have an epidemic of, I'm going to use the counter of what you said, of the working poor in our country, but across the globe. So I've always been a proponent of spending more time, more energy on defining the living wage and what that means by country, by region. So I want to understand more about that. Are there guidelines for organizations and companies that they can now better understand proper pay for their employees that gets them out of this cycle of working poverty and into more of a sustainable lifestyle that supports a family?
Absolutely. So MIT has a living wage calculator that companies are increasingly using to gauge against their own wages. So PayPal has been a really interesting one to watch here. They did this really impressive effort over multiple years where they said, we're going to make sure everybody who works for PayPal can live a viable economic life. And it's interesting, one of the things that motivated them down that path actually is similar to the work Canary does. So they had set up an emergency fund internally for people who experience crises. And that's the work that Canary does with companies. And they saw that usage of those emergency funds was just much higher than they would have anticipated. And it did operate as the canary in the coal mine, if you will, to let them know that they had potentially a bigger issue. And so they did a wage study to compare what people earned relative to what a living wage in their areas would be. They also did they defined, and I'm going to mangle it because I don't work there, don't remember all the specifics, but they essentially defined what they thought the economic goal was for their people, like a certain amount of income, discretionary income above and beyond expenses. And they also really normalized conversations about personal finance within the workplace. So they encourage people to look to the workplace as a place where you would be able to grow your own financial knowledge and improve your own management of your financial life, because that is a piece of it. It's really important that we shift away from a fight about the minimum wage, which is just like fighting about the bottom, and instead aim for the top, like aim for everybody to earn enough to live.
I couldn't agree with you more. And there's enough for everyone. Abundance begets abundance. And as our working poor segment of our population continues to grow, Rachel, it impacts all of us. It impacts the wealth of all of us, but we've got to shift that energy, that thinking around this concept. So I appreciate your words there, and I appreciate your ability to work in the word canary.
Yeah, exactly. And that is really why we named Canary what we did. Something I want to make sure to emphasize alongside what you said. You're saying it really increases the wealth of all of us when we care about those at the bottom. And Just Capital's work has really demonstrated that. So one of their activities is that they put together an index, like a stock market index of the most just companies. So the Just 100 index is something that you as an investor could buy, just like you could buy an S&P index. And what they've seen over the last 5 years is that the Just index has outperformed the market because it's actually better for business to be good to your workers. It's not an either or. It is just Absolutely better to have workers who are engaged, can pay their rent, can show up to work on time as a result, can feel empowered to do their work as a result. And especially in today's economy where most people have, we're a service economy. So a worker who is stressed out is not going to provide the best service, right? So, it's really not, this is really a case where doing right and doing good are very much aligned, and we have to make sure to remember that.
And in and of itself, Rachel, this is not innovation. It's
Right.
just more of the repeated call to action that we've got to move the needle in this space. So now tell us
Yes.
the interface with Canary and your
Yeah.
work and how Canary is helping organizations to make progress.
Sure. So what we do is we help companies to participate in the charitable activity of donating money to a nonprofit and giving that money to individuals who experience a crisis. So the way to think about this is, well, there's multiple ways, but we have a rising number of natural disasters affecting more and more people. And we have lots of personal events that operate the same way in people's individual lives, right? A death in the family, or somebody losing their job, or a major home repair that needs to happen, a catastrophic car problem that means you can't get to work. And those kinds of crises are really important in people's financial lives. Those are the moments where, but for $1,000 or but for $500, somebody, the apocryphal story people tell is that, your car breaks down, now you lose your job because you can't get to work, right? And from there, it all unravels. And that storyline really is true for folks. So Canary was really founded around the idea that the right money at the right time matters. And we need more ways as a society to identify when people have those moments and simply get them the money that they need. Then you could envision a world where everybody earns such a robust living wage that we just expect folks to save on their own and be prepared for every emergency that comes across their lives. But for one thing, we're not in that world right now. And for another, it's just, I think, really important that as a community, we step up for each other. And so employers are, and workplaces are a really important community in which it's important to step up for each other. And so we help companies to do that.
Let's talk tactics for just a moment, Rachel, and then I want to ask you a few more questions. So tell us about the construct, right? So there's an ability for those of us who are able and willing to donate to organizations, and then this money then gets to people of need. So talk us more through that process, especially those of us that are interested as individuals or as business leaders trying to understand how to connect.
Exactly. So Canary has launched both a nonprofit and a for-profit. And so the way this works is that an employer partners with both the nonprofit and the for-profit and donates money to the nonprofit. And also, if they choose to, runs fundraising campaigns so that employees can donate into the nonprofit. And then when other employees, or perhaps the same employees, frankly, experience an unexpected or unpredictable, unavoidable event that causes them a financial hardship, they can come and apply to Canary for help. If they meet the eligibility criterion for the program run by the nonprofit, then they receive financial assistance. It's not savings, it's not a loan, right? So it doesn't need to be repaid back. It's really a way for the company to say, we know that sometimes folks in our community experience crises. And when that happens, we want to be there for them. And so when we talk to HR leaders about why they do this, or CEOs about why they do this, it's the first thing people say is because it's the right thing to do. We should be there for each other. When you start digging into the operational issues, it's, well, we're going to do this anyway, but we're going to do it haphazardly. And it's wonderful to be able to do it consistently and fairly across our population, right? So it is the case that working people have crises and then somebody sets up a GoFundMe for them. And then the employer has to figure out, how are we going to engage with that GoFundMe? Like, do we give to it? That's not a super comfortable place to be as an HR leader. So we enable them to really professionalize their response to crises experienced by their employees.
Rachel, I definitely understand the example that you gave around the car breaking down. And without transportation, some people don't have alternatives. But you also mentioned the emergency that many people go through, which is the loss of a loved one. And, from an HR perspective, many organizations just aren't positioned or don't provide very healthy bereavement leave and paid bereavement leave. So the best organizations out there are anywhere from like 3 to 7 days. But if you've lost a loved one, especially someone really close to you, that's not even enough time to plan a memorial, much less find your new normal and all of the expenses that come with losing a loved one. So just very excited to hear about Canary's willingness and support of people who are going through loss of loved ones.
Yeah, it's really complicated for people and expensive, frankly. And often the death of a loved one comes after, at the tail end of a period that's already been quite stressful. So it's an important moment for an employer to express their support and concern, both as you're talking about in terms of paid leave, but also potentially in acknowledging this is a big expense.
I know that the number of people that can benefit from Canary transcends gender, race, dimensions of diversity. So would love to just talk to you about the connection of your work with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging concerns, so DEIB concerns. Talk to us a little bit more about that. I'm going to have questions on the other side as well.
Yeah, of course. And this is something I've been thinking about so much lately. So one place to start here is to think about how people deal with emergencies in the first place, right? We tend to rely on our friends and family. And in fact, the research that I did before launching Canary, the Financial Diaries, it was a deep dive into the financial lives of 235 households across the US. And what we saw amongst that group was that over 90% of people at some point during the year either gave money to a friend or neighbor, borrowed money from a friend or neighbor, saved with a friend or neighbor or family member, right? Our financial lives are very intertwined with each other. And so when people experience a crisis, like the first thing that happens is that their friends and family and neighbors step up for them and help. And that's true regardless of race, regardless of country of origin, regardless of how long your family has lived in the US. That is just how people live with each other. And yet, because of the massive racial wealth gap that we have in the US, where white families have 10 times the amount of wealth accumulated as Black and Latino families, it is much more difficult for Black and Latino families to do that for each other with large dollar amounts, right? So they might do it for the same number of people might give money, but it's going to be tens of dollars or hundreds of dollars and not thousands of dollars. And so one really critical thing we have to achieve as a society is let's make that giving that we do with each other instinctively all the time, in every context, happen across more socioeconomically diverse communities. So what we see with the Canary grants is they absolutely disproportionately go to women. 75% of the grants we gave last year went to women, and over half of them went to non-white households. And, that's not at all consistent with the representation in the country of those populations, but it's what we would have expected. And it makes sense and it feels very right. And so I think having an emergency fund like this can be a really important part of a DEIB strategy.
Absolutely. And I think you covered all of the important points, Rachel, even as I think through going back to a topic you touched on previously, the living wage. And even as more companies are doing the right thing and paying their employees more, in some households, that new money is really used to play catch up for years of being behind, for years of financial struggle. So even though on paper you look and see that someone is making good money now, they could be paying off some things that have happened over a period of years. And then, as you know, a death in the family, a car breaking down, a natural weather disaster could just derail someone who's on the straight and narrow, just trying to make things right financially.
Yeah. We also know there's really good research around the idea that higher earning Black and Latino individuals are likely to be supporting a much broader network financially than white individuals who are earning the same amount, right? Because they may be the first in their generation, they're first in their family to go to college and have this great high paying job. And they may have cousins and aunts and uncles who didn't yet achieve that milestone, right? And so we have to be mindful that the same resources don't go as far in different kinds of households, different kinds of communities. They get stretched across more people.
It's a great call out. Actually, it does go far, right? It's helping more people.
Yes, exactly. I said that the wrong way. Exactly. It goes really far, but it means there's a lot of pressure on those resources, both in terms of time and in terms of money.
Absolutely. The priority is not Rachel saving. It's,
No.
taking care of family, immediate needs, and saving is, while it's a priority, I don't know that it's a priority A or 1. It may be a priority B, C, 2, or 3. So
Exactly.
So tell us more, Rachel, because now I'm so intrigued, excited to learn.
Yeah.
As an individual, how can I get connected with Canary as an HR or DEIB leader? What's the process? Where can we find you?
Yeah, really easy to find us. Our website is workwithcanary.com, and I am findable at rachel@workwithcanary.com, or of course, we're on LinkedIn. And always happy to connect with folks. I think, we're really equipped to work with employers of all sizes to set up funds for their people. Like at some point, we'll get to a place where we can take donations from individuals who would be given to the general population of workers who might need help. We're not quite there yet, but that's on the roadmap, and we'll get there eventually. Right now, we mostly work with either employers or individuals who want to set up a fund for a particular group. So large donors who can support a fund, whether it's at a school or a local community group. So we're able to work with nonprofits as well as employers. And and I think the other thing I want to say there is this is a movement. Like we're part of a broader set of folks who are thinking about how do we build the financial health of working people? How do we make sure that people have access to the cash that they need when they experience a crisis? And so if you're interested in that general topic, I'd love to be connected.
Well, beyond Rachel, thanking you for being a part of this podcast, I want to thank you for choosing to do the work that you're doing. You are changing the lives of people every day. And I know that you may never know all the goodness that Canary is doing, but I just want to thank you for being an innovator and for being very intentional in the space. And I'm positive more will follow and the goodness will flow.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's mutual. Thank you for helping to lift up these important ideas that I think are really, I think ESG is what's going to save us ultimately. When companies are doing right by the world and their full set of stakeholders, and we leverage capitalism to move us all in the right direction, that's ultimately what we need to have happen to live the lives that we want. So thank you. And thanks so much for including me.
Of course. Thanks, Rachel.